Please state your name.
Leah Gaines.
Okay. Today is December 2nd, 2022, and we're at Riviera Beach Preparatory Achievement Academy in Riviera Beach, Florida. I think the zip code is 33404. Okay, Ms. Gaines, what do you do professionally?
I am the Executive Director of the Center for Enterprise Opportunity. We're a nonprofit, and we primarily serve small and minority-owned businesses. We're also a community development financial institution, SBA intermediary lender. So we provide small loans, grants, technical assistance, and we provide advocacy on behalf of small businesses as well.
Nice. How long have you been doing that?
I co-founded the organization actually with former County Commissioner Maud Ford Lee, who was the first Black County Commissioner, and that was around 1996. I served as chair and in various capacities on the board, and then they asked me to step in and actually become the executive director when we lost our executive director back in 2010. You've known me prior to that with Business Economic Development Revitalization Corporation. I merged the two. When I became the executive director, I left that organization and I merged the functions of that organization with the Center for Enterprise Opportunity.
Where do you feel we're at with Black enterprise, Black business, Black progression, and the African American community, business-wise, locally?
Yes, it's been cyclical. You know, it rises and falls, and I would say currently we're on the downside right now. As you know, the entire economy is on the downside, and generally Black businesses fare worse than the general white businesses because of several factors, such as, you know, the history of redlining, you know, no lending opportunities, very little access to capital. Black entrepreneurs often do not have family members that can help seed or finance their businesses in startup capacity. And so they're more reliant on government or private enterprises for startup, and that's a very tough road to climb.
What is your stance on women's choice?
I'm pro-choice, let me just say that.
Okay.
I think that decision is a decision really for that person,
That
individual to make in consultation with their family members, religious leaders, and or doctors. And so I think that is really up to the individual. Regarding Black on Black crime, I don't like to use those terms because I think implicit in the term Black on Black crime is that Black people have a predilection to commit crime, and that's not necessarily so. We have the going back to the Columbine shootings, we have the Pulse shootings recently, we've got the Las Vegas shootings, we've got the Charleston shootings, we've got the Virginia Tech, we can go on and on, but no one says white on white crime.
Right.
So why is it racialized when we talk about crime in the Black community? And we have to take a macro level and look at what are the structural reasons of why people commit crime and who they commit crime against. And typically it's about who's in close proximity to them.
Okay.
Now there is an exception to that people generally will commit crimes against other family members. They call it intimate violence, that sort of thing. But there is an exception to that in that white males tend to, they have a higher rate of committing crime in the public realm, in the public space, going beyond family members. And I think that's also a part of a systemic origin as well, based in privilege. There is a bright spot, but the bright spot really is dependent on having people really in the right place to impact, to push those levers of power to make sure that resources are opened up for people who are typically marginalized. Let me give you an example. When the pandemic came, Palm Beach County received millions of dollars from the federal administration in what's known as CARES. It was Coronavirus Assistance Resource Act. Well, when the county put together a $50 million fund, they were really only looking at larger businesses. So I approached the county and I said, we need to look at this in tiers. There needs to be a fund set up for larger businesses that employ 500 and more. But we also need to have it to service businesses that have 5 million in revenues and even 1 million and under in revenues, because those are the businesses that drive the economy. That's where you go, you go to the cleaners, you go to the baker, those small businesses on Main Street, what we call Main Street, are really take up 90% of most businesses, and they drive the economy. I was successful in doing that, and was able to assist 210 small minority and black owned businesses in accessing millions of dollars, and that kept their businesses open and afloat during the pandemic. But if that advocacy had not been there, and I'm not trying to say that I did anything great, because it was just a small effort that I did, but I went to the county commissioners and I had them basically restructure how they were going to distribute those monies, those funds. And then I also had them do a layer of technical assistance, because it required a lot of financial documentation, which many small businesses are really so busy just running the core business operation that oftentimes their documents are not in order. So I was able to assist them in getting their docs in order, which also helped them to access other pots of money that were out there for businesses to take advantage of because of the pandemic, to keep them afloat. So it's those small things that we've really got to make sure that our elected officials are in tune with, that it's really not just serving the larger corporate interest, but it's really the small business that drives the economy. So we've got to keep that at the forefront to make sure that we all can support our families.
What is your perception of where we're going, or what needs to be done? How do we even further improve on opportunities for lower socioeconomic
That's a good question.
Communities?
That's a good question.
And how do we engage those communities?
Yes. Well, I think it's going to take some new ways of thinking and some new ways of doing business in the community. And one thing that I'm very excited about, that I really want to explore and take a little bit more time to see how we can get more businesses to consider this model, and that's cooperative businesses. And those are business entities where everyone can have a share of ownership in the business. Now, the purpose of the business is not just to generate and maximize the greatest profit that you can, so that one or two people can get their dividends. But really the purpose of it is that when the money comes in, that money goes back into the business structure, so that those people can remain employed. So it's a self-employment model, and it's something that can be self-sustaining. So you could have 4 or 5 people coming together to form a business, and it'll be, you won't necessarily become a millionaire, but it's a great way to sustain families and communities that don't have a lot of opportunities, for example, to have gone to college, or they don't have a skill or a trade that can bring them a lot of money. This is something where they can get short skills in a short period of time, ramp up, and be able to support themselves and their families.
Okay.
Both advocacy and policy with the public sector and the private sector, because as we know, the public sector takes our tax dollars and they use those dollars to hire businesses. So if everyone is being a part of paying those tax dollars, everyone should benefit from being able to do business with those jurisdictions. And the same with corporations. Corporations, as you know, black consumers and drive a lot of economics for corporations. And so they can start making demands on those corporations and say, look, if we don't get a fair share of being distributors, dealers, or suppliers with your company, then we won't purchase your products anymore. So those are the kinds of advocacy that we need to really start looking at to really make an impact. Because if we don't, things are just going to go along as they are now, and they'll get worse.
How do you feel about unions?
I like unions. I think that they were left out of this last election. I think, well, I'm a Democrat, let me just say full disclosure. It's not a political statement, but I really believe that they left out the union workers. They could have focused more on that. They were very I want to say almost like single issue. I felt as though the Democrats, Val Deming, she's a fine individual, but with the last few years really being about Black Lives Matter and black bodies being injured and killed at the hands of the state, I don't think that was the most appropriate candidate to have to run for Senate. A former police chief. We need some reform in law enforcement. And I think she was really trying to, unfortunately, out law enforce the Republican candidate. And if I, as an independent voter who basically decided this election, had a choice, I'm speaking hypothetically, I'm not independent.
Right.
But if independent voters have a choice between a real Republican and someone who's trying to sound like a Republican, who do you think they're going to go for? The real Republican. So I think it was a backlash, and I really just thought that she was not an appropriate candidate. Charlie Crist, because he had been a governor before they thought he should have been a governor, but he did not excite and fire up the base, and he was single issue. You asked a question about a range of issues. You asked him a question about jobs and economics. His response was about Roe v. Wade. If you asked him a question about civil rights, his response was about Roe v. Wade. It was a single issue. Mm-hmm. And they seemed to be afraid to speak to all voters, which I think had a bad impact in terms of people trying to be, there was no incentive to register to vote for the party or to turn out and vote for the party.
You work with business, right?
Yes, I do.
What advice do you have for anybody that wants to start up a business?
I would say do your due diligence. And by that I mean do your homework. Be prepared. I think starting a business is a great exercise for any person, particularly a young person, because it can inspire you to do more. You can change your environment. You can provide new services. And at the same time, you're generating money to support yourself. So I think the best thing is just make sure you have a good business plan, but don't really focus necessarily starting out on the technical aspects of the business plan. Do a strategic plan. Say, okay, here's what I need to do this very well. Okay, how much time is it going to take me to make sure I'm up to speed on that? And then map that out. Okay, the next step would be, okay, now I need to figure out, really, is this a good business to go into? Let me do my research on that. Then say, okay, now, what do I need to get myself in a position personally to make sure that my business is going to thrive? Because a lot of times people will be in less than perfect personal situations, and they think going into a business is going to cure it. It's not. You got to get your personal situation situated first. At least be working on that, and then go start your business.
Is it worth it to go to college?
That's an interesting question, because I have, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4 nephews who all went to college, right? One is a lawyer, one is an engineer, one is an IT person, and one is a pharmacist. However, they all say college was a waste of time. But they were disciplined enough, and by that they meant going to class every day. Now, if you're asking the question, no, college is not necessarily a requirement for you to have a great quality of life and make a decent living, a great living actually. It just depends on what your interest is. So there's no one answer. If you want to be a medical practitioner, of course you have to go to college, but even if you want to be something that doesn't require college, you're going to have to make a sacrifice to be good at that too. So it really doesn't matter. College is just a mechanism to achieve your goal, whatever that is. So you determine what your goals are, and it may or may not include college, but know that you've got to be disciplined and make sacrifices to make sure you achieve your goals.